Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Patrick Hoge from the San Francisco Examiner, reporter. Thank you also to the United Democratic Club and the event's co-sponsors, including the San Francisco Democratic Party, LSP Topless LGBTQ Democratic Club, Ed Lee Democratic Club, Raoul Wallenberg Jewish Democratic Club, and the District 2 Democratic Club. We're here tonight to hear from Lori Brooke and Stephen Sherrill, two candidates in the June election for Supervisor of District 2, which includes the Marina, Pacific Heights, Presidio Heights, Presidio, Jordan Park, Laurel Village, Cathedral Hill, Anza Vista, and North Panhandle, among other places, I'm sure. The June election will decide who will serve the remainder of the term of former Supervisor Catherine Stephanie, who was elected to the state legislature, leading to Supervisor Sherrill's appointment in December of 2024. Incredibly, there will be another election in November for a full term. This evening's format will be as follows. The candidates will each have 2 minutes for introductory remarks. There will be no gong to mark when times are finished during the evening, but we will have someone in the front row with visual indicators to help keep the conversation flowing. After introductions, I will ask a series of questions of the candidates. We suggest 2 minutes per response. If a rebuttal is requested, we suggest 90 seconds. So, let's get started. Lori, you want to start?
Can you hear me? So, for those who don't know me, I am Lori Brooke. I am a lifelong Democrat. San Francisco runs deep in my family. I'm a third-generation San Franciscan. My grandfather, my father, and my brother all worked for the city, for the San Francisco Water Department. My grandmother spent 30 years in City Hall in the IT department, back when they had the punch cards. And my brother's son, my sister-in-law's right here, Samantha, their son, Jack, is entering the San Francisco Police Academy. And I myself have been a neighborhood organizer for nearly 30 years. So my family's served and been a part of the city for generations. Also, my husband John, who's here, and our daughters, we raised our daughters Audrey and Catherine here in District 2. I, like many of you, would like to keep San Francisco livable for us, but for the next generation. And this is my home. I love this city deeply, and I will fight for it. I am also the president, or have been the president, and still am, of the Cow Hollow Association for 19 years. And through that work, it's a lot of the day-to-day quality of life issues that you go to bed thinking about or wake up thinking about. It's the traffic and parking, it's the zoning matters between neighbors, it's all the little things that add up to whether you're feeling good or frustrated with your city. I also co-founded Neighborhoods United SF and Rescue SF. Both of those are citywide organizations where we unite the voice of the residents and we bring that voice to City Hall, where we present our concerns, we present our ideas, and then we also demand results. And both of those groups, one focused on the homelessness crisis and the other one focused on our housing crisis. So I've worked with city departments. I've been your voice in City Hall to come up with creative solutions, and I've also been there to fight back when things didn't go our way. I want to keep the city moving forward. I want to be your voice at City Hall. I want to deliver real affordability, ensure safe and clean streets, make sure we have a well-run and honest government. This is my home. This is not a stepping stone. I'm independent, I'm experienced, and I have deep roots in this community.
Patrick, thank you. To all of you, thank you. To our 6 hosts, thank you very much, and especially to the church. Thank you. I think at a time when so many of our San Francisco values are under attack, being here in a place that prioritizes safety for immigrants, prioritizes safety for queer and trans folks, prioritizes the rights and the values that we ascribe to so heavily here in San Francisco, I think this is the appropriate setting for tonight. But I'm Stephen Sherrill, and over the past year serving as a District 2 Supervisor has been the absolute honor of a lifetime. I live in Presidio Heights with my wife, Sarah, and our 2 young children. And I love this city, I love this district, I love taking the kids to swim at the JCC, I love going down to Chrissy Field, I love my bacon cheeseburger at Perry's, chicken paella night at Balboa Cafe, and I'm also incredibly lucky. I'm incredibly lucky that I'm married into a 5-generation San Francisco family. One grandfather in Lowell, one grandfather, raised a family just a few blocks away on Washington. And having cousins around, having aunts and uncles around to help us be here, help us raise our family is a privilege. And it's a privilege that I know not everybody shares. Now, over the past year, we've seen a reset in City Hall. We've seen what happens when pragmatic, moderate supervisors are aligned with pragmatic, moderate mayors. We've seen a reset on crime. We've seen a reset on our small businesses. And finally, we are seeing some daylight at the end of the tunnel in our housing crisis. And we did not get here by accident. When I look around this room, I see people who stood up when our elders were getting attacked. I see people who stood up when drugs were right on the street. I see people who stood up and called for reform and sensibility on housing when we haven't had it for decades. And so my commitment to you is we are not done. What we've seen over the past year is not over. It is time to accelerate. It is time to make our streets safer, our small businesses better, and it is time to build some housing here in San Francisco that supports our families. Because at the end of the day, this is for my family, this is for your family. I am so lucky, but we gotta make it easier for other families to be here, to start here in San Francisco, to grow here, and to stay here across generations. So I'm glad to be here tonight. And Patrick, it's good to see you too. So let's kick it off. Great.
So this one goes to Supervisor Sherrill, and that is, what about your experience and accomplishments makes you the best candidate for District 2 Supervisor?
Yeah, I'm really proud of my experience across my career. I started my career in the mayor's office in New York City under Mike Bloomberg, an excellent place to learn about results-driven, results-oriented governance. I worked in the private sector for nearly a decade after that, investing in power and energy infrastructure. More recently, had a startup that served nonprofits. Making sure that numbers matter, that results matter, has been a through line throughout my entire career. Working in the Mayor's Office of Innovation here in San Francisco, I had a real pleasure to be able to focus on data analytics around homelessness. What is working? What is not working? We built the first database that connects the disparate streams of information about people struggling in the street. Public health information, homelessness information, emergency response information. The question is it working? Is it not? And over the past year, as a supervisor in District 2, I've been focused on results. One of the biggest things that comes to mind is the Salvation Army opened up a transitional housing facility for individuals who come out of drug rehabilitation. Abstinence-based housing. This to me was important because their success rates of over 70% are significantly higher than the 12.5% success rates you see in drug treatment programs across the country. And so this was about, this is the right type of program to invest in, but it was also about what is the right type of program for the neighborhood. So we added foot patrols on Chestnut. We made sure that the trees that hadn't gotten planted a block over were getting planted. We made sure that they added a steam cleaner, a pressure washer. These are the little things that are important to drive results, and we've seen crime is down. Homicides are lower than they've been since the 50s. Crime is down 30%, 26% year over year in the city, and even more across the district. We have a net increase in hiring of police officers over the past year for the first time since 2019. This past year has been about results, and we're going to keep it going. Okay, all right.
Okay, well, I probably come from a different angle. I mean, Stephen's accomplishments come from more of an administration down. My experience over the last 30 years, as I joined the Cal Hollow Board 27 years ago, is from the grassroots up. I have been in the community working when nobody's watching. And when I was talking earlier about all of the quality of life issues, we stepped up and did this work for what impacts of the Presidio on the neighborhood, disaster preparedness. We can create a block captain program, the things that nobody else would be doing if we didn't do it as citizens. And I bring that perspective to this office. I bring the perspective of being you. I have been the woman that is sitting out in the hearing waiting 4 hours to get up and speak. And sometimes I look up and I wonder, are they actually hearing me at this hearing? Are they listening? So I know what it feels like to be on the other side and want change in the city, or at least want them to listen. And that is the one thing I will absolutely bring, is your voice into City Hall. I also come with perspective of the things I've done with Neighborhoods United SF and with Rescue SF, where there was a problem. The residents came to Cow Hollow Association and they said, what are we going to do about the homeless crisis? And I didn't have an answer then. I said, well, let's figure it out. So we started Rescue SF. We pulled together 55 neighborhood associations across all 11 districts. That takes energy, effort, organization, and coordination. We had people from all different walks of life and perspectives, but my job was to unite that voice, target it, and bring that, like I said, the concerns and the ideas to City Hall. Same thing with Neighborhoods United SF, where there was the issue of the upzoning. So we pulled together 60 neighborhood, not just neighborhood associations, tenant groups, affordable housing developers, small business advocates, labor groups. We had a very wide political spectrum of people who had a common concern. And it's to take those energies, combine them, and point them forward towards a solution. So I am results oriented. I am you. I am from the neighborhoods. Every day I wake up thinking about what I could do better for my community, and I will take that energy inside of City Hall.
Okay. Now that you caught a breath, for you, what is the number one thing you would like to accomplish
In the district. The number one thing I would like to accomplish is for residents to feel that their community, the quality of life is humming. I think we are heading in the right direction as a city, but there are little issues that need to be improved. So the number one thing would be quality of life, but that is a lot of specific issues like safety. You guys want to know that you not only are safe, but that you feel safe. And there's some ideas I have on that besides increasing the staffing of our police. It's ways that you can have more community policing, having people who augment the police staff who are on the streets. It's also things besides policing, like how are the streets clean? We've actually had programs within the Cow Hollow Association where the third Thursday of every month we get out and we clean the streets and we create community. So overall, I wouldn't say it's one specific issue. It's a general feeling within the district that they feel good about where they live, they feel safe where they live, they feel that it's clean, they feel like their small businesses are being supported, and they feel like there's growth in the housing, that we bring in housing that's actually affordable.
The number one problem the city faces right now is the fentanyl crisis, and the city is on the right track. We are going in the right direction, but that doesn't mean we can't let the accelerator up. People suffering in the streets is a moral crisis. The fentanyl crisis is the largest public health crisis we've had since the AIDS crisis, the AIDS epidemic here in San Francisco. Solving that will take an enormous number of levers, but it also takes doing things differently. Just yesterday, we voted on a new, Tuesday, we voted on a new reset center. This is going to be 25 beds where individuals using drugs in public can be arrested and brought to a setting that is managed by health workers and staffed by the sheriff's department. And the question here isn't about how we throw people in prison. That's not the right answer. The question is saying, have the approaches of the past several decades worked? And I think the answer is clearly no. We need to take new approaches and saying, we want to get people into treatment. But if they are unwilling to do so, I believe it is our moral responsibility to put them there. Dying is bad. We cannot keep stepping over people dying, and we need to take new approaches to get people the treatment that they need, that our morals demand. And I think the Reset Center, which is a really new approach, it's a great approach, it's a great step. Funding abstinence-based housing is another addition to the myriad of challenges, of solutions that we need. These are the new approaches that we're taking, and I think we need to continue to invest in these. And even though it's not comfortable to say, law enforcement does need to be a part of solving our drug crisis.
Okay. Also for you, this question is, what is something that you were able to do to deliver for District 2 that makes you feel good?
I think the first thing I'll say is, sitting here on Franklin, we're very close to Van Ness. Well, the first big piece of legislation I passed was regarding zoning on Van Ness. Van Ness is struggling. Van Ness has been an under-focused on, underappreciated neighborhood, Cathedral Hill, Opera Plaza. There's some awesome people who live there, some fantastic people who live there. Passing legislation to allow for chain stores to operate on Van Ness without an unnecessary 9-month permitting process is something I'm extremely proud of. Van Ness had 53% retail vacancies, yet the city was taking a completely unnecessary approach to allowing those storefronts to be filled. I'm proud of delivering on this because yes, we saw Apple Cinemas open. Is Apple Cinemas in District 3 across the street? Yes, it is. But I think if you live on Van Ness in District 2, you probably want to go to a movie. So we have to think about it that way. And this is about saying, are we going to be honest about the problems that we have in the city? And are we going to take pragmatic solutions to face those? So that was the very first piece of legislation that I passed. And the last one that we voted on just on Tuesday was allowing movie theaters to serve beer and wine. Is that a solve everything? No, of course not. But the historic Clay Theater is trying to reopen on Fillmore Street. I am so excited about it. The designs are beautiful. But to make sure that they're financially successful, that they can continue to open, we have to give them options. And beer and wine is a great simple option. And the approach that I take to these is saying, yes, this is good for the Clay Theater. But the other thing I said is, why can't it be good for the rest of the city also? So we expanded it to apply across the whole city. This is about creating opportunity in District 2, but also across the whole city. A really good district supervisor is a strong advocate for the district's needs, but also understands that District 2 residents love a great San Francisco.
So I'm coming from a different perspective, being that I am not currently a supervisor or, writing legislation. So the work I do is what is community organizing. It's getting people together to make a difference. A couple of things that come to mind. Of course, the one that is top of mind for all of us is the upzoning that's occurred recently, and to make sure that the residents were aware of what was going on, and they could have a voice in amendments that should have been provided into that upzoning plans. 99% of the residents in our city had no idea this was happening. And it was through our efforts, through Neighborhoods United SF, that we made people aware of the details, gave them an avenues for which they could speak out and show up at hearings. Of course, in the end, it didn't prevail. It was voted in. But I think there were some amendments that were added into it that made it better. There's also other big things we took on that nobody would think just a neighborhood group would do. There's a lot of activity that happens in the Presidio that impacts the adjacent communities. There were ideas to demolish the bowling alley and put up a museum. A lot of people felt that that kind of commercial or recreational facility was important versus the museum that they already had in there. And that was a bigger undertaking than you realize. That took a lot of work to get the Presidio to change course on that. And there was other factors that changed it also. There's other things that we've done, again, as a neighborhood association and a community organizer, beautification plans for Lombard Street. We spent the energy and time to write up very specific beautification plans. The city has not adopted them yet, but these are the things that I believe impact all of the community. How is your community going to be zoned? How it can be built? What is it going to look like along Lombard? What are the impacts of traffic as it flows in and out of the Presidio? Those are big tasks, and I take those on as a community organizer. What do you think I can do if I get inside a city hall where I can actually put forth some legislation behind some of this?
Good. So a Chamber of Commerce poll released Wednesday showed a big jump among surveyed voters in positive public sentiment about the state of the city. Do you share that sentiment, and what do you credit the shift to? I guess I'll start with you again.
I do share that sentiment, and I credit it in large part to our mayor. I think he gets out there and he is sending a positive message, and it begins with a message. It's like a feedback loop. He says stuff positive, and you're like, yeah, I didn't think about that. And I think that as a leader of our city, he is doing the right thing. And as a supervisor, I will stand side by side with Mayor Lori to continue those kinds of policies and plans that push our city forward. I believe that a successful mayor is a successful city. And that is where I will stand. If perchance I disagree with him on a policy that impacts our district, I'm not afraid to speak out on that either. But I think that's what District 2 residents expect of their leadership, is is that we are independent and we will make decisions in the best interest of our district. But I do give a lot of credit to Mayor Lori and the supervisors that are in place that have been supporting him.
Yeah, I give Mayor Lori a lot of credit. I'm very proud to be endorsed by Mayor Lori and to be one of the supervisors who has stood next to him and supported him in this journey, bringing San Francisco back. It has been a great year. It started with the passage of the fentanyl emergency ordinance. It started with us standing up and saying, what is the crisis we see in front of us? It is fentanyl. We are going to act. Over last year, we talked a lot about housing. And what we're seeing is we're beginning to take a crack at affordability for the first time. We're beginning to say we need to craft opportunity for our families, for the next generation, and for seniors who want a new apartment with an elevator. This is about taking honest, forthright, thoughtful cracks at the very serious problems that have been facing us for a long time. It's about rethinking how we address the fentanyl crisis. It's about rethinking how we support small businesses and frankly business across San Francisco. It's about taking a pragmatic approach. It's about pragmatic, moderate supervisors aligned with pragmatic, moderate mayor.
You stole a little of my thunder discussion with Vanessa, but I think there's enough here to continue on that vein. And so I'm going to ask this question about commercial corridors. Some have fared very well or relatively well in District 2, but others are still struggling. And what have you done and what do you think you can continue to do to help those areas that are struggling?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, Chestnut is back up above pre-pandemic level. It's one of the first corridors outside of Mission Bay, and that's fantastic. I think anybody who's walking down Chestnut sees that it's on fire. Fillmore Street is inches away from being right behind there. It is doing great. Sacramento has got a lot of filled storefronts. Union Street still has lower foot traffic, and that's why with the Union Street Association, I work very closely, and I'm very proud to have Regan Capone, the president of the Union Street Association, support and endorsement, but working closely with them on an entertainment zone. Very simple thing. It says, hey, there is already a street festival happening. Allow the restaurants to sell beer and wine and to-go drinks. This is not about this is not about Mardi Gras, this is not about open containers willy-nilly. This is just saying, hey, if we're gonna have a street fair, if we're gonna close down the sidewalk for something, let's let the businesses be creative. These are small things, but they make a big difference. I am so excited for next month, the first entertainment zone event happening, but then also First Year Free was a big one. I just introduced an extension of First Year Free. We have to make it easier for new businesses to fill empty storefronts, not only because it helps those businesses, those new ones, also because it helps all the other ones around it. Foot traffic breeds foot traffic. It is incredibly, incredibly important. And then the last thing I want to make a pitch on, we do need to do more to help Muni. Good Muni is good for the economy. It is good for small businesses. It is good for downtown. It is good for families. Good Muni is good for San Francisco.
Our commercial corridors are the lifeblood of our city, and it's what makes living in a dense urban core worthwhile. I feel like there are villages where I go get the bread here and the cheese there, and you have a little basket that you might walk around France in. It is truly the delight of living in this neighborhood all these years and knowing the business owners' names, and they see you coming. They'll bring when I was pregnant with my daughters, they would bring the food to my house before we had the services that you pay for it. And with these small corridors, I think it's really important, as Stephen had mentioned, to make it easier to open, to stay open, and to grow. I mean, we need that next business to grow and to be a legacy business. And legacy businesses are those beloved businesses that have been around for 30 years or more. Those are the businesses that people come to San Francisco and visit. And our commercial corridors, what makes them wonderful is that they are walkable, they're sunny, they're human scale. You do feel like you have a sense of place. And that is what I will strive every day to make sure that they continue to thrive. Here's an idea. We have community benefit districts in San Francisco, and those are organized groups that provide services above and beyond and very localized for the communities. They tend to be in the downtown and the eastern parts of the city. There's something called the Main Street America program, where it's a smaller version of that. And there's a corridor that has asked us for help, the Buchanan Street, right next to the Safeway. There's a person that she lives above what is now the empty Goodwill store. And she said that corridor is just dying on the vine. And I said, you know what, that would be a perfect example of where we could try the Main Street program. And what you do with the Main Street program is it creates an entity that has a focus on trying to attract the right kind of businesses that are needed, keeping the streets clean, keeping them well lit, making sure that there is support and behind those businesses that come in. So my position as a supervisor is I am 100% behind our small business corridors, and I will always, always put them as a priority.
Supervisor Sherrill, Mary Lori's family zoning plan was recently approved. How do you evaluate its approach to upzoning? Are there specific areas in District 2 that you would advocate have different height or density limits?
Can you ask that question?
Yep. Basically, the family zoning plan was passed, and what is your opinion of its approach to upzoning? And how are there particular areas that you would advocate, if you could, for different height and density limits?
Well, San Francisco has a housing crisis, and we have for 30 years, and we've totally failed to take it on. And for the first time, we've decided to create opportunity where opportunity has not existed. The family zoning plan was an excellent first step in addressing the very real affordability crisis we have in the city. Yesterday morning, I was standing outside of Sherman Elementary. I was talking to a teacher. She's a single mom. She lives in Oakland, wants to move back to the city. She makes $114,000 a year. And she said to me, I didn't grow up poor. I made every good decision in my life, and now I am poor. But it turns out I'm not poor enough, because the affordable housing available in the Sunset for teachers right now, she's referring to very specific development. $3,600 a month, that's affordable for me. We are failing her. That's what this teacher strike is about right now. It's about the cost of living in San Francisco. With the family zoning plan, is it a perfect plan? Of course it's not a perfect plan. Nothing's a perfect plan, but perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. We need to make progress. But the biggest thing with this family zoning plan, if we say, hey, we did it, we succeeded, we will have failed. Because the real issue here is the cost of construction in San Francisco, and that's the nut that I want to take a crack at next. How do we get the cost per unit below $1 million? At $1 million per unit, we can't build workforce housing, we can't build missing middle housing, and we can't even build the market rate housing that we need. This is about being honest that transfer taxes are unnecessarily standing in the way. The city's fee structure is standing in the way. The extended permitting timelines are standing in the way. This is where we need to go to create opportunity for our families.
Well, it's no secret that I have been critical of the state and local housing laws. The real issue is not supply, it's affordability. And all the housing laws that have been passed over the last decade have resulted in and are resulting in out-of-scale luxury towers, because that's what pencils out. When you build housing in the most expensive land, you are going to end up with the most expensive units. That's just the reality. And we are trying to build housing on the backs of for-profit developers who aren't built. Their business model is not about affordable housing. District 2 has been building housing for 125 years. There aren't a lot of vacant lots. The only way you build upzone in District 2 is you have to demolish what exists. And that is not a plan for a city to go around and demolish existing sound housing that often has affordable housing in it, and it has commercial tenants on the ground floor. So people say, we need more housing. I agree. But the question is, do you want the housing to be luxury glass towers that crop up randomly throughout your neighborhoods, along your commercial corridors, and ring our shoreline? Or would you rather our city focus on getting more housing through unlocking the 70,000 units that are in our pipeline, that are projects that are approved and ready to go? They have the infrastructure associated with it, they have market rate, they have affordable housing, and they have the public buy-in? Or would you prefer that we work on the 40,000 units that are vacant and create plans that incentivize small landlords to put those units back on the market? Overnight, we could have a lot more housing. Would you prefer that we spend time on the 30,000 illegal units that need to become code compliant? Or insisting that public land not be sold to for-profit developers, but be sold to affordable housing developers and build 100% affordable housing on those public lands? And do you prefer that we spend our energy and our time in building housing where we have the land, have the need, and have the desire by those communities? And finally, do you prefer leadership that pushes back on Sacramento when they foist mandates upon our city, when instead we should be having local control in how our city grows?
We can't pretend like state laws don't exist. They do. The family floating plan is about seizing our future in the local way. And also, let's be clear about something. A unit of affordable housing costs just as much to build as a unit of market rate housing. These costs are sky high across the board. And when we're talking about demolition, nobody's talking about demolishing existing housing stock. We're talking about demolishing the old CPMC hospital that has stood vacant for years. The family zoning plan would have entitled that hospital under the current plan in about 2 months, and it took years. The UCF, across from the JCC, that plan took years. Under the family zoning plan, it would have taken months. Those would both exist today. Those are the underused parcels that we all think should be turned into housing. This is not about demolishing existing housing stock. And also, by the way, we can pull on every existing lever possible. We can focus on vacant units. The vacancy tax didn't work. Judged, illegal by the courts. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be focused on that. We shouldn't be focused on illegal Airbnbs. We can do all these things. But the approach we've taken over the last 30 years is not working. We see this each and every day. We have to move forward. We have to create opportunity. I know that. For those of you who've been working hard on this, thank you. And I stand with you, and I'm looking forward to continue to be your champion in City Hall.
Okay, so the family zoning plan has passed, but apparently developers don't care. The Marina Safeway site is entirely a state law from the state density bonus laws. Developers are going to choose the path that delivers the most profit. So the family zoning plan, in hindsight, has become kind of a red herring. Look over here, but the state laws are what are ruling the day. And the Marina Safeway is a harbinger of things to come. Now, I'm going to just pull back a little bit here. The mandates that we have been demanded of our city, the 82,000 units by 2031, were determined pre-pandemic. They have nothing to do with the reality of our city and what the loss of people through the pandemic. The state has population projections that show our growth over the next several decades at modest. So when you redo the math of how they determine these mandates with real numbers that exist today, we do have enough capacity to build within our city. We did not need to do a family zoning plan. That plan is a developer giveaway. It does not bring the affordable housing that we want for the next generation. I have children in their 20s. I want them to live here. I want the housing to be affordable. But if you try to do it through for-profit developers, there's no way you are going to be able to afford most of what they will build. The hard truth is, to build affordable housing, we are going to need state funding. You need to have subsidized funding to build public housing. And that has all dried up. And nobody wants to talk about that. But that is where we need to go.
It's kind of in the same vein. Regarding the Marina Safeway, obviously controversy about that. How do you balance the city's need for more housing with neighborhood concerns about scale, character, and the temporary closure of the area's only grocery store during construction? I guess we're going to you first.
Okay, fine. So as I mentioned, the Marina Safeway is 100% Senator Wiener's state laws. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can blame people all you want around that point. It is the state laws. And I think it's where the dog caught the car. I don't think they realized that developers would come out so hard and so strong and put forth a project that is not in the interest of the community. Of course we want more housing, but we need to be thoughtful and responsible in where we build it and how we build it. That lot, for instance, it's actually taller than the Fontana Towers. It's a 25 and a 20-story tower. There's minimal infrastructure to support the 790 units, which equals about 1,600 residents. It will put out of commission a grocery store for years, and that is a major grocery store in that area. It also is, as we're learning, on, as you know, landfill. So there's some requirements that they have to dig deep pylons. When you dig deep pylons in a landfill area, it creates mini earthquakes, just like the Millennia Towers. There has to be a lot more thought behind a project like that, other than making it begin to look like Miami. You know, our city is special, and we have to be thoughtful between the balance of housing that we need and protecting the city that we love. The Marina Safeway is the wrong project for that site. I mean, the project they put forth on that site. It's a little bit like the Death Star landed on a Safeway site. I am not afraid to stand up to the state laws that have put us in this position. And that is actually what needs to happen next. We need to speak out as a city, and we need to demand that our city be able to zone ourselves based on our needs and not have Sacramento say, this is what you get, and too bad. And the fact that our mayor cannot do a thing about this, that says a lot at how far we have gotten into the ability to grow our city in a way that makes sense.
Two things can be true at the same time. We can desperately need to build housing across the entire city, and definitely in District 2. And the Marina Safeway proposal for 25 stories can be a really bad idea. That's what I think. Now I've talked to the mayor about this. We're actively working on it. I've met with the line, and in knocking doors in all the neighborhoods around that, all the residents I talk to say, yeah, that's a great site for housing. 25 stories is too tall. Not 9 to 1. 25 stories is too much. We can build the housing we need without it being 25 stories there. That is the great thing about the family zoning plan and the amendment that I passed to zone that at 40 feet. We can build dense, neighborhood consistent housing, and having the family zoning plan, having a locally appropriate zoning plan, that the rough consensus that we have around this, we need to continue on this path of local zoning and encouraging adherence to the family zoning plan as much as possible. And that is something that when the mayor met with the line yesterday, we are pushing forward on this. We're pushing forward on all the possible levers to ensure that appropriate housing, dense housing that we desperately need is built there, that is built safely, and that benefits the neighborhood.
I want to make one more comment about the Marina site, and that is, since it is state laws that are allowing that, you know, as we sit here, there are more state laws being written by Senator Wiener and his allies. And I do have to say, you know, we're going to bring up endorsements. Stephen, you are endorsed by Senator Wiener, and you are endorsed by GrowSF and the MBSF, who are fully in support of projects such as the Safeway. And if that's what people like, that's fine. But as residents in D2, you have to understand the values of your leadership. That is not where I stand. I would stand behind what the residents need and want and what makes sense for our community, and with the eye on building affordable housing, but that's within scale to our community. I am not endorsed by those interests, and I will always look out for District 2 first.
There's a difference between building affordable housing and blocking all housing, but we won't get into that. When it comes to state laws, I've been very open about the fact that I believe the state density bonus laws need reform. I believe that they need height limits. But I also know that the approach of the last 30 years of just saying no and just standing up lead to penalties like the builder's rights, lead to these laws like the state density bonus projects, lead
to 50% of firefighters not living in San Francisco lead to the cost of living for teachers far outpacing their salaries. The just say no approach does not work. It has proven not to work. We need to be thoughtful about the approaches going forward. We need to expand opportunity, and we vastly need to rethink how we generate funding for affordable housing, especially that missing middle workforce housing. We need to pull on many, many more levers, and it's about expanding opportunity. It's about thinking more broadly and building a future for ourselves, for our children, but also for the San Franciscans who are aging here and need those opportunities to stay here as well.
Supervisor Sherrill, how would you promote affordability more generally in the district?
Yeah, that's a great question, Patrick. Thank you. For me, affordability is primarily about four things. It's about housing, it's about transportation, it's about childcare, and it's about education. Now, housing we've talked about quite a bit, haven't we? On the transportation side, I cannot be a stronger advocate for the muni funding measures coming up on the ballot this fall. Muni is absolutely critical. Muni is absolutely critical to the health of San Francisco. It's critical to students getting to school. It's critical to folks getting to doctor's appointments. It's critical to downtown. It's critical to our small business corridors or our merchant corridors whose workers need to get to work. Muni is so critical. And when we talk about these funding measures, we're not talking about this deficit leading to a 10% cut of service. We're talking about 40% service cuts. So I cannot be a stronger advocate for the muni funding measures coming up on the ballot this fall. And the next thing I want to talk about, I am absolutely thrilled that the mayor has committed to expanding the child care subsidy to 200% of area median. If you talk about the things after housing, child care is the biggest expense. And Hayden, I'm so sorry you're having a baby in 6 weeks, and I have to say that, but it's true. Expanding this child care subsidy is incredibly important, but the thing that I want to harp on here, and I pushed on last week in a hearing we held, is not just expanding it, but how are we going to do it? How are we going to make sure that after 2020, 2035, we can continue to fund it? And how can we open up more spots for childcare? It's not just about the money. About half of infants and toddlers couldn't even find a spot if they wanted one. This is one of the other things that made the family zoning plan great. It expanded the ability to build more child care centers across our city. This stuff is really, really important.
Affordability is a word that's being used across our country in all aspects because it is pressuring families everywhere. One of the biggest things that you'll end up paying for monthly is usually your housing, whether it's your rent or it's your mortgage. And we know San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities to live in, just as New York. And it is a bit of a fantasy for us to wave a magic wand and say, don't worry, we're going to make it less expensive overnight. It's always been an expensive city. But when we can chip away at it and we can produce affordable housing, trust me, what's going to come down from the state is not going to be affordable. It's going to be expensive. If you really want affordable housing, then we should be pushing for laws that actually find the funding from the state to supplement the building of truly affordable housing so our workforce and our next generation and our teachers and our firefighters can live in those units. Also, the cost of childcare was a very good point too, and that sounds like they're addressing that. But it's also the cost of groceries and utilities and all the things that are coming down at you from all sides. As a legislator, I would always look for opportunities where we can reduce costs in all those areas. Another thing that of course plagues us is insurance, whether it's home insurance, car insurance, or health insurance. And that's another big nut to tackle, but it's things that as a city we should be looking at in ways that we can lobby and push back on the state, because if you try to buy a house now and you try to get insurance, forget it. It completely throws the whole dynamic off. I mean, there are serious things, systemic things that make living in a city and raising a family in a city harder and harder every day. And I will always, always be on the side of the residents in this district to find ways to make your life more affordable and your quality of life more enjoyable.
we can't both push back on the state and then expect the state to give us more money for affordable housing. If we really want to seize local control for our future, we need to rethink how we're funding affordable housing locally. We need to rethink housing bonds. We need to rethink, should we be using tax increment financing for affordable housing? Should we be rethinking how our pension system is investing in alternative investments like affordable housing? We have to seize control locally. This is about being creative locally. This is about being thoughtful locally. Can we do this by ourselves? Probably not. Am I going to rely on Donald Trump to bail us out with federal money for affordable housing? Absolutely not. We need to seize control locally, and that means being creative locally with our affordable housing funding streams, because we cannot continue to rely on state streams and federal streams that has failed us time and again, and it will not bail us out in the future.
When you say that we shouldn't push back on the state, I disagree.
I didn't say that. I didn't say we shouldn't push back on the state. I said we can't expect to push back on the state and also ask them for more money.
Okay, well, let me just answer the question this way.
Let's wait till we're done and you can jump in.
You want me, do I let that?
No, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. The reason we need to push back on the state is the state took a situation such as housing and it made it punitive. In the past, those numbers, those guidelines that we had to build housing in our city were just that. They were guidelines. And granted, if we didn't meet those guidelines, we got a slap on the wrist. So maybe that was too permissive. But what happened in one cycle, one 8-year RENA cycle, was it went from that format to a mandate and serious punishments for not meeting it. Now, cities, they create capacity for housing. They don't build the housing. So the state set our city up for failure. They gave us a number that we would never meet in a million years. But then what happens, it triggers the punishments. Our city went under the review, the annual review, the only city in all of California that had an annual review of how we were tracking towards our mandate. Every other city has a review after 4 years. Well, of course, we did not pass because it is difficult to build in San Francisco with the cost of all the elements. So we failed. And now housing is ministerial approval. So yeah, I think we should push back on the state. I think they set us up for failure. And when they say, if you don't build the housing we demand, we're going to take away money for housing and transit, that's very deceiving and deceptive. To take away the thing you need to build housing if you can't build the housing. So yes, I think we do need to push back on the state. I think they've overstepped.
I think we need to take control locally. I think we need to do everything in our power, which isn't, there are a lot of costs outside our control. Trump tariffs outside our control, materials costs outside of our control. But is a transfer tax that's 60 times the state average the right approach? No. We can take control locally over many, many things that we have failed to do. And that is what I'm most excited to be addressing over the next year. Excellent.
Okay, turning to public safety. This police department is still understaffed by about 500 police officers, leading to overtime, burnout, and challenges retaining officers. What proposals do you have to close this gap, particularly as we're facing budget deficits?
Yeah, fully funded police department is the #1 priority for public safety. And over the past year with the Mayor's Rebuilding the Ranks program, we've seen the first net increase in officers since 2019. Applications are up 40%. That is excellent. But this takes work. It takes advocates standing up and speaking out after the horrible murder of Grandpa Vicha that many of you in this room stood up and did. It takes progress over time. It started with the appointment of Brooke Jenkins. 2024 Prop E, allowing automated license plate readers, has vastly helped drive. Yeah, I know, it's too bad, right? Car break-ins are down 70%. Gosh, vastly helped these things. We need to leverage all the tools at our disposal to support our officers today. It means putting in 3 new pro-safety police commissioners, which we did last year. These things take thoughtful work, and it takes standing up and saying to officers, thank you. Thank you. That is one of the most important things that I think any of us can do. And working hand in hand with our police department and with our officers, and I'm very proud to have the endorsement of the Police Officers Association, working hand in hand with them to keep our streets safe today. And crime is down, violent crime is at record lows. Property crime is down nearly 4 times since 2022. Sorry, it's down 25% year over year and more than that since 2022. And working together on this, it's going to take time. But we need to do what we can now. That's about amplifying technology to give our officers the resources they need now and supporting them as we recruit going forward.
So residents are worried about the response time when there is a crime in the neighborhood, or if they're witnessing a crime in Walgreens, if anything's ever going to happen. So I absolutely agree, we need a fully staffed police force. My family's contributing one. Got to start somewhere. I know Sam, she's worried having a son as a police officer. But in that vein, here's some ideas. What if we work on creating an incentive-based program for high school students and college students to join our police force, particularly San Francisco ones, so that I know you have to have a college degree to join the police force, so to get them through college and maybe offer ways to help pay for their college tuition. Then what you're going to have students, students coming back and serving a city with a stable career in the community that they know. That is how it used to always be, particularly, out in the Richmond and the Sunset, all the cops out there, they grew up there and they serve that community. And I think we should find a way to make that happen again. Another idea is that there is something I was involved with. It was called the San Francisco Next from the Chronicle, and it was an initiative to come up with ideas. And I was on the group for public safety along with Lily. And what we did is we had a unique idea, and we came up with peacelets. And peacelets are like a park, but it's mobile, and it moves around the district to where the needs are. And in that peacelet would be a police officer, or more like a police ambassador. You could have service workers. And that is the kind of entity or vehicle that would not only deter crime, but it also is a place for residents to go when they, what do we do about this graffiti? Or what about this poor homeless person that is suffering on the streets? And what about my car that just got broken into? There are things that those persons there could handle that don't need a sworn officer to handle. There's another idea. I don't know how many of you know about the 179-year-old program called Patrol Special Officers. That has ended, and I think we need to reinstate that. And those are not sworn officers, but again, they're like beat cops. They're out there, they know the public, they know the businesses, and they deter crime. And they can handle a lot of the things that a sworn officer doesn't need to get out to. These are augments to the police staff. It is not to replace them. But I think there are a lot of ideas we can do to make our communities feel and be safer.
What are the top public safety priorities that you hear from District 2 residents, and how are you working to address those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fentanyl crisis is number one. You want three? The fentanyl crisis is number one. And when we look at the quality of life issues that so many people face and struggle with, they all come down from the fentanyl crisis. And number two, you could say store break-ins. And number three, I would say might even be the most important, but these are the underseen communities. Sexual assault, crimes against immigrants, crimes against elders. These are communities that we have not been investing in enough. And so for me, sitting as the Board of Supervisors representative on the Family Violence Council, advocating for civil legal defense for victims of sexual assault, it's not always about law enforcement and about criminal legal actions, it's also civil legal actions. San Franciscans do not right now have a right to civil legal defense when they're victims of sexual assault, and that is a problem because it means they do not get the restraining orders that they need. That's why I've made it clear over the last several months that a budget priority of mine is the slightly over $1 million to fund civil legal defense for victims of sexual assault. These are the underseen, underreported crimes that are incredibly, incredibly important to keeping our neighborhoods safe and to keeping all of us feeling safe.
So I am not the current supervisor, so I don't have a staff and an office where people call and complain to, but somehow they find me anyway. And I either get phone calls or emails or texts from residents that have seen me as a leader in the community to address their issues. So I hear about the car break-ins and the burglaries and the assaults that happen to women and men in the neighborhood. And they look to, of all things, the Cow Hollow Association to do something about it. And as a supervisor, of course, I would take my abilities further in being able to legislate and put forth things that really can make a difference. But certainly as a leader, a community leader, I represent the interest of these people. So I make sure that when things are brought to us, we do as much as we can to help. And when necessary, we elevate it to the supervisor's office who has power beyond that to make a difference. But you know, you brought up some good things, the sexual assault, and I do applaud your efforts in carrying forth a lot of Catherine Stephanie's work in that area. That is a big deal. I have 2 daughters, and as a mom of daughters, you realize that it sneaks into their lives in many ways. It's not just the headline grabbing. It happens on dates, it happens at parties, it happens in college campuses. Sexual assault is a big deal, and it often goes unreported. And so I think that is something, you know, with the party scene that we have on Chestnut Street and Fillmore Street, I think there's some evenings that don't end well for people. And another thing with the sexual assault and a whole different audience, a whole different category is the homeless on our streets, particularly the women. They are the most vulnerable people in our community. They are targeted nightly. I work very closely with my Rescue SF capacity with Community Forward, and they are for women, to help the women get off the street. They would literally sit in a plastic chair straight up at night than be out on that street. And I think that we have to pay a lot of attention to those that are suffering on the street, in particular the women that are extremely vulnerable. So sexual assault is a big deal, a bigger deal than we realize.
This one is for you, Lori. What have you done to address open drug use and drug dealing in the district? What would you do in the future?
So I will say that we're fortunate in parts of District 2, and I know not throughout all of District 2, but in the part of I live over in Cow Hollow, and I do applaud Patricia Hoge, who is a neighborhood activist, and yeah, she deserves an applause. She works tirelessly. She knows the homeless individuals by name, and she has done a lot with the help of the Cow Hollow Association, the Golden Gate Valley, the Marina Community Association to address the homeless crisis. The drug dealing that happens in our area, there was a few that were very loud and vocal drug dealers. And we've heard that a lot of them come in over the bridge and they do their drug dealing in that near the Bridge Motel in that area, and then they're back out of town. So it's not as visible as what you would see in the Tenderloin or maybe lower parts of Van Ness. And that, of course, is in our district. So it hasn't been something that I personally have had to address in the drug dealing, but certainly as a supervisor, I would address it where it is needed in the greater parts of lower Van Ness where it's acute. And to deal with the drug dealing, we first have to arrest the drug dealers. I support the DA 100% in arresting and prosecuting drug dealers. I think that our city, the message when you get to San Francisco is that we will not tolerate open air drug use and drug dealers in our city any longer. And that message needs to go out so that the drive-by drug use that's happening does not happen anymore. And once we get a handle on the drug use, you will start to see things change in our communities. Thank you.
There are 2 things, when you ask that question that stick out in my mind. A couple of years ago, a couple kids found fentanyl. Toddlers found fentanyl on Moscone playground. Overdose, thankfully revived with Narcan. Getting to know those mothers over the past, well, one of them's been a friend for over a decade, and the other one getting over the past year, making sure our family spaces, our children's spaces are safe has got to be our #1 priority. That's why I focused resolution last year on making sure the SFPD had a plan to address illicit drug use, not just drug dealing, but illicit drug use near family spaces, parks, playgrounds, schools. And it's about being creative. The SFPD came to me and they said, hey, we can't possibly cover every single one of those. And we said, okay, great, where do we start? Where do we get creative with 3 officers? Where do we make sure
that if officers are going to arrest someone who's openly doing drugs, not just dealing but doing drugs, how do we get that person to a safe place where that person has the opportunity to get into treatment? And now we're seeing the opening of the Reset Center, which is staffed by law enforcement and by public health officials. We can use law enforcement as a stick to get people into the treatment that we need, that they need, and that we need, frankly. The other thing that stands out to me is Jefferson Square Park. Now, early last year, Jefferson Square Park, right here, massive problem. It was taken over, overrun. And in February of 2025, major effort, arrested 86 people. Since then, Jefferson Square Park has been a lot better, but some of the activities moved to those alleys. And so in working with Pat McCormick of Northern Station, it's about saying, hey, how are we keeping a clear eye on Jefferson Square Park and making sure that remains safe? But then how are we being creative about Saturday nights in the parking lot of the Federal Credit Union? How do we make sure that the residents of 300 Elm Street, like Ricky Harris, how do we make sure that Ricky can walk his dog without getting accosted? And so it's saying, I know you don't have enough officers, but we need to be creative with staffing. You need to be there from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. on a Saturday night in the parking lot of the Federal Credit Union.
Okay, so regarding behavioral health problems in public in the district, what have you done to address that, and what would you seek to do in the future?
Yeah, does everybody, behavioral health is a clinical and a very appropriate word for drug addiction. Is everybody comfortable with that? Great. So look, the behavioral health crisis, the fentanyl crisis, what we see, and it's not just fentanyl, right? It's meth too, and it's other things, but it is a behavioral health crisis. And when we are addressing it in public, it's about making sure that we have the tools to remove people from public spaces into spaces that are safer for them and for everybody else. This affects everybody. And so when the mayor is saying, I'm not going to open up 1,500 new shelter beds because we need the right kind of beds, that means we need beds for sobering. We need beds like the Reset Center. We need more treatment beds, and we need different kinds of treatment beds. You know, state and federal law don't allow for abstinence-based housing. We can't use state and federal funds for abstinence-based housing, so we're using city money. Now, is an abstinence-based rehabilitation program, treatment program, the right for everybody? No, it's not. But is it the right thing for a lot of people? Yes, it is. We need to continue to invest in those. But we also need to lock up the systems so that when someone is sitting on Pine Street between Steiner and Pierce, and residents call 311 and they call the police, and for whatever reason, SCRT didn't come because they weren't called, how are we making sure that that person gets to 5150? And then when they get that 5150, where they clearly should be on a mental health hold, that's a mental health hold, a psych hold in the hospital, how are we making sure that 3 days later they just don't rotate back on the street? And that's why I think we need a lower threshold for conservatorship. People are struggling, they need help, and sometimes they're not willing to do that because they can't. We need a lower threshold for conservatorship, and we need the beds, which we don't have enough beds to accommodate these people. We need the beds to serve and treat them in the way that they deserve.
Through my work with Rescue SF, I got the opportunity to not only work with the city departments in the homeless space, but to work with the service providers and to actually meet with the homeless themselves to understand what is happening in this community. The homeless crisis is both a public health and a public safety issue. We do have the tools to address some of the most acute situations. They say there's about 352 individuals on our streets that are the most severe cases. Those are the ones you probably see most often. And we have the 5150 holds, and we also have SB 43, and both of those tools allow us to bring people off the street, get them stabilized, and get them on a treatment plan and on the path to, ideally, independence. One thing I learned with Rescue SF is that we definitely need more shelter, and that is something I believe the mayor is working on. Because when you get people off the street and you put them into shelter, that's fine for the night. And a lot of homeless people do not want to go into shelter. They get their stuff stolen. It is not a place where you're going to recover. But nor taking people from the street and putting them into permanent supportive housing is not always the best path because they're not prepared for that independent living that a permanent housing would provide. So what we were advocating to the Mayor Reed's administration was increase the amount of shelter homes and focus on interim shelter. And we worked with various groups on that. And one of the things was the 33 golf cabins. I don't know if anyone's ever seen, if you go down Golf Street and Crossover Market, there's these cabins. We being Rescue Act, approached Tipping Point, Daniel Lurie's organization, and we said, we have some ideas that would provide some dignity and independence to people coming off the streets rather than going right into permanent supportive housing. And they gave $1 million to those cabins, and they've been in operation since. We also spent a lot of time to find alternatives like that, and we had a lot of motels willing to offer their units for the same kind of thing, where you have your own space to stabilize, and yet you have common services and common dining, and then they move you on to the next level of independence. And this is ideas that we as community members came to the city with, and we'd like to see, where the Reed administration may not have adopted them, to see more of that within the Lurie administration. So in the end, we do not choose between compassion and accountability and safety. We need all of those factors when we're trying to deal with our homeless crisis.
And just to add one more thing, kind of building off, I think something that we probably share in common here, is that going forward, the approach on adding new facilities has to not only be about the facilities themselves, but also about the neighborhoods where the facility's in. And, you know, during COVID, a lot of individuals who were not able to be successful on their own were put in the motels along Lombard. And I think a lot of the residents along Lombard felt the very serious impacts of not having the necessary services in those motels. And so the approach that we took when the Salvation Army was contracted to open up Wells Place, a transitional housing facility for individuals exiting from treatment programs, the approach that we took was a neighborhood-based approach about adding a foot patrol on Chestnut and Ambassadors, about making sure that some sidewalks on Octavia were fixed, that a homeowner that had been blocked from planting a tree could plant the tree. We asked Salvation Army to buy a pressure washer, and they did that. It's about taking these neighborhood approaches. And so I think going forward, we have to make sure that as we open new facilities, we see success like, like the Home Rise program on Scott, the transitional age youth facility, like at Wells Place. And this is going to be a major focus on Van Ness as we open up housing for formerly homeless veterans as well. It's going to be a neighborhood approach for success for everybody.
I agree with that. And I just want to share that from the position of the Cow Hollow Association, we have engaged in that. We did support the Wells Center, and within Rescue SF, we worked very closely with Steve Adami on some of the ideas about the interim housing and the option of sober living, which is good for some people, and there's other options for other paths forward. But I want to mention the second, which is the transitional age youth housing. When that was proposed in our neighborhood, people weren't sure what was coming, and there was a little bit of hair on fire at first. But we worked closely with Gail Gilman with Community Housing Partnership and Sherrill and Adams with North Street Youth Services, and we ended up coming to a place and an agreement of how that program was going to roll out in the community that was better than when it started, and Gail will be the first to tell you that. And the good thing about this program, when it went into place, is now, all these years later, the Cow Hollow Association meets every quarter with the management in that facility to see what can we do as your surrounding residents to help the youth that are in there as they're trying to move on in their lives. We also give them Christmas gifts every year, and one of our board members fills the freezer with Trader Joe goods at the end of every month because that is when they run out of money. So we know as a community, this is the community organizer's perspective, what you do when nobody's looking and what you do for your community to lift everyone. So I have that perspective and that experience, and then I'll bring it into City Hall where we can take these ideas more broadly.
Next question. What responsibility do you think District 2 should have in meeting our citywide homelessness goals?
Well, first of all, I think one of the problems is we probably haven't set a citywide homelessness goal. And that's a problem. We need to set a citywide homelessness goal, and obviously the goal should be that no one is homeless. That we have functional zero. I think actual zero is probably nearly impossible, but functional zero. But I think District 2 has a strong obligation to help the city meet its goals. You know, the Oasis here, the family shelter here on Franklin, has been very well run. I've visited several times. The opening of the Wells Place Salvation Army, Edward II. These are all really good steps forward. And I think one of the other things that we have to address is that homelessness is a housing problem. And when the cost of housing is this high, we will have homelessness. Drugs, poverty, mental health, those often decide which of us fall into homelessness. But the cost of housing, the access to housing at affordable levels, almost guarantees that there will be some homelessness no matter what here in San Francisco, even if we were to eradicate fentanyl overnight. And so yes, District 2 has a major role to play in addressing homelessness in San Francisco, not only in being a willing partner to open up the Shores and Plowshares facility on Van Ness and making sure that they add new lights on the outside to make sure that the neighborhood feels safer, to make sure that they have residents volunteering to clean up the street outside. We do have a moral obligation to support facilities like that are done the right way, and that means with the community involved. But it is also about housing.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I didn't get a chance to mention it earlier. Mark Nagel was my co-founder with Rescue SF, and we would meet every month with Sean Ellsburn, which was Mayor Breed's chief of staff. And we would come with ideas and thoughts about what we can do and what to work with the city. How do we bring the residents' voice into the solutions? And one thing we insisted upon ad nauseum was performance management, and how our city needed to have a performance management style to tackle the huge problems like homelessness. And what that means with performance management, you have to set clear goals, you have to have measurable outcomes, and then you need to report that to the public. Most people have no idea what's happening, how the money is being spent. I mean, Mark and I went and we interviewed over 22 different service providers. It was about, what it was like to be the front line. And I have to tell you, a lot of people like to bash the service providers. Oh, that's where the money is being thrown at. They are doing God's work. If you saw what these people have to do and the workload, and they drive in from Tracy and they get paid hardly nothing. A lot of them have recovered themselves and they've turned around and given back. So I think it's really important as a city, when you are trying to get to functional zero with homelessness, we need to know how are we actually going to get there, and how do we measure it, and what does it cost, and are we succeeding? And if we're not, that's okay. How do we rejigger the system? And I think a lot of times leaders don't want to admit they're failing. I think the public is a lot more reasonable when we're told honestly what's going on and that you need to change course than when you say things are fine when they're not. So I think performance management needs to take place in our city government, starting at the mayor and through the department heads.
Okay, at a time when LGBTQ plus rights, especially trans rights, are under attack nationally, how do you use your role as District 2 Supervisor to actively protect and affirm this community in San Francisco?
Yeah, there's no question. Queer and trans folks are under attack across the country. And San Francisco has long been a beacon of hope, a place of safety for queer and trans folks. And I am deeply committed to standing up today, tomorrow, and always to protect the right to love who you want to love, to be who you want to be. This is our San Francisco values. This is what makes San Francisco, San Francisco. And I am proud to stand up with the queer and trans folks in our community, for our friends, for our family. It is my deepest privilege to be able to stand up and keep standing up. And that is my commitment each day and every day.
Even you and I are in agreement there. I am proud of this city, and I'm proud that it's a safe haven. I actually remember when Harvey Milk was assassinated. I'm going to expose my age. I was in high school. And that was something that was a shock, that somebody has to suffer the judgment, the discrimination, and the violence for being who they were. That changed me. That to me, as a teenager, I couldn't even fathom that there were people in our community that had to suffer that way. And I have been an ally with a capital A from that point forward. I am proud of our city. I also remember, and this maybe all of you do, when Gavin Newsom, Mayor Newsom, married that first same-sex couple. That to me was a watershed moment. Please, and I am grateful for him for taking that step. San Francisco often is the place where things happen first. I also have the privilege of being a deputy marriage commissioner. And there is never more joy I would experience watching, all couples get married, mind you, but a same-sex couple, when you would see the feeling that their marriage now is being supported, recognized by the community and by the law. It was heartwarming, and I can tell you, when Pride Week would start, the line was out the door for people to get married. And the next biggest time is Valentine's Day. So this Saturday, I don't know if the city hall does marriages on Saturday. I think they do, actually. So I have been a full supporter of the LGBTQ community. I mean, deeply, deeply aligned with them. And I will always be in full support of your needs and the services that that community wants.
And on a less happy note, the city is facing a projected budget shortfall in the upcoming 2-year budget of roughly $877 million. How would you close the gap, and do you think layoffs will be needed? I forget who's up next. You get the
It's even like her. Okay. The budget deficit's real. Whether we like it or not, it is real, and it is time for some real honesty and hard choices. I mean, at first, I think we're still in post-pandemic shock. Our economy is still reeling. Although the tone is up and the direction is heading in the right way, there's still some real truths about what we have suffered, particularly our downtown. So the first things that we cannot cut, and that should be kept within the budget, are public safety and emergency services, the 911, the police staffing, and the fire staffing. That's a non-starter. We always have to fully staff and manage that. Another thing that is a non-starter is core infrastructure. We must always fund the sewers, the utilities, the streets, all the things that keep our city functioning. So everything in the budget related to that should be kept there. The areas where we have to be honest, and you asked about headcount, is probably going to be with headcount, if not salaries. There is a lot of bloat at the top level of throughout the departments in our city. And there needs to be a long, hard look at what is the staffing and the salaries that make sense. There's also a lot of duplication of departments, so you could be reducing and consolidating there. And I think there should be some scaling back of the discretionary spending for things such as consultants, or studies, or pilot programs, things that are not delivering results. But at the end, we need to protect the basics. We need to demand accountability and stop funding things that don't deliver results. And just FYI, so this is not a budget year, it goes every 2 years. So this is the little bit of the breather, and then it'll happen again in the next year.
This year will not be a breather. We have a $936 million 2-year budget deficit to address, and it is a massive problem. It will not be a breather. I approach this budget with the same priority that I approach all my work: public safety first and foremost. Fully staffed police department, sheriff's department, district attorneys, public defenders who are a part of the public safety apparatus, and our fire department. Now, when it comes to cuts, I think we have to extend the hiring freeze that we currently have on non-public safety positions, and we have to look at eliminating the vacant positions that are there. The second thing I look at is administrative overhead and bloat. I was talking with the provider who is here tonight. I'm not going to call you out, but I was talking with a provider, an HSH provider, who told me that for one of their $15 million contracts, they have 4 contract monitors. When the homeless department has 4 contract monitors for a $15 million contract, that's not appropriate. That's where we need to be looking at cutting some of the blow. And the third thing that I want to propose is kind of a twofer. This is something that I think will help us address the magnet problem that we have for bad behavior, and will also cut back on spending a little bit. The way that we administer cash assistance programs, the county assistance program here allows for individuals who've been here for 30 days to get the full cash benefit. I think we need to protect key at-risk populations, transitional age youth, especially LGBTQ youth. I think we need to protect our immigrant populations. But aside from that, when we look at this, families, when we look at this, we are attracting people for bad behavior here. I think we need to move the residency requirement from 30 days to 90 days carefully, making sure that we are not hurting some of the key at-risk populations that we all believe we should be serving. But that's one of the other things that I think we need to do. And we need to be forthright about this because we can't keep coming back to these billion-dollar cuts. 2030 has a $1.5 billion projected one-year deficit. We need to address that this year as well.
There's a measure targeting the June ballot that some unions have put forward that would raise the overpaid executive tax. What is your position on this measure and why?
I think when we're looking at new taxes, we need to be incredibly careful about what behaviors we are taxing. And so it's named, the moniker is the overpaid CEO tax. CEOs themselves will not be paying this. This is actually a gross receipts tax. And so when we look back to 2025, when Walgreens closed 11 stores across the city, I said, hey, what caused you to close? One of the main factors in that was the city's gross receipts tax. So when I look at the CVS at 701 Van Ness, and I had residents in the neighborhood saying, we can't close. They said, we're gonna close. We're gonna close. And we talked to them, they reassessed, they said, no, we don't have to close. But if we're gonna increase a tax that was a factor in Walgreens closing 11 stores, a tax that affects our pharmacies, our groceries, our key neighborhood resources, that makes me very nervous. At this time when our economic recovery is very tentative, and when we're losing grocery stores and pharmacies already, I think we cannot do it this way. I am not in favor and supportive of this tax because I think we need to prioritize grocery store and pharmacy access.
D2 residents and citywide residents don't want more taxes. I think people are very concerned about how their tax money is being spent. For instance, here's an idea. What if we put forth a tax oversight task force? I think we feel like there are taxes coming at us left, right, forward, and back. Who has really sat back and looked at all the taxes that we have, similar to the charter reform that we're doing right now? We have to sit and think about, see what's been happening and what happens in all the departments, the homeless department, the taxes, everything that we have on our city is things that get cobbled together over the decades. And it becomes so big that nobody wants to take the effort and time to unravel it and put it back together because of the potential disruption that would cause. But when it comes to taxes, I think people do not need one more thing that makes life less affordable. I think residents and businesses, they need results from our taxes, not excuses for the deficits. No, tax revenue is critical. Can't get around it. It is critical to how we pay to run our city. But we need to reinstate trust. The residents need to trust how those taxes are going to be used. We don't want to be driving businesses away, and we certainly do not want to continue to burden our residents with more taxes.
There's another tax measure that also may be on the June ballot, and that one is put forward by the Chamber of Commerce and other business groups. It would actually, among other things, lower taxes for many small businesses and speed up scheduled increase in the overpaid executive gross receipts tax. Do you favor this, or are you against it, and why?
I think similarly, it falls into the category of right now is not the time to be overlaying more taxes on our citizens or doing things that drive out business. I haven't actually fully looked at their proposal and how it differs from the CEO tax, but in general, I would not support things that are going to be taxing our residents at this time.
Yeah, this measure is very much a counter to the overpaid CEO tax. It includes a poison pill that would essentially override the overpaid CEO tax if they were to both pass. Look, I think Prop M, which voters passed in 2024 to right-size the business tax regime in the city, I think was a really good start. Kind of settled us a little bit. It provided us with a foundation for our economy to come back. I like the consensus that we had. Let's stick to it. Let's keep moving forward. I don't like either of these two tax measures very much. Yeah, if I had to choose, I love alleviating the burden on small businesses, but frankly, I'd rather both of these not be on the ballot. Very good.
Well, regarding the two measures aimed for the November ballot to fund our local transit agencies, there's a regional sales tax measure that would benefit BART, Muni, Caltrain, and then the city parcel tax measure for Muni. If you could just briefly tell me your positions on both of those and why.
Yes and yes. We need Muni. We need BART. Thriving public transportation is critical to any thriving city. It is critical to our downtown recovery. It's critical to our neighborhood merchant corridors. It's critical to our children getting to school. And it's critical for people of all modes of transportation. For every person who gets on the 1X, that's one less driver you have to compete with for a parking spot or a spot in the lane. Public transportation is absolutely critical for the future of this city. And look, when we're looking at these funding measures, I don't know if you all saw the article in the Chronicle about how many of the BART stations would just have to straight up close. And at Muni, as I said before, look, the MTA has been criticized, and rightfully so for a lot of reasons. They've made over $150 million in cuts. Now they need to be clearer. They need to be more transparent. They need to communicate better, that is for sure. But when we are looking down the barrel of a 40% service cut, this deficit is more like a 20% budget deficit, 25% budget deficit. But Muni spends about $600 million before the first bus rolls out of the lot. Fixed costs are high. It's just the necessity of operating a transit service. We're looking at 40% service cuts if we don't pass these measures. That is crippling to the city. It's crippling to families. It's crippling to those in need. We need to pass these measures. It is an absolute non-starter for me. We have to be in favor of these. There is just no other position that I think makes sense.
I would agree. Muni is a critical part of our city's infrastructure, a dense city like ours, and we need to do all we can to keep it up and running and functional. But we also have a bit of a complicating factor. Years ago, you had Muni operated onto itself, and then you had the Department of Parking and Traffic that was separated. And then the voters decided to combine them. And that might have been a mistake. I think when you cobble those two entities together, they don't necessarily complement one another, and the energies and the ideologies may conflict. I do think regarding the parcel tax, that's a hard one. I think at the end of the day, we're probably going to have to swallow that pill, because our Muni is important and we do need to get it up and running. But it is a bit frustrating that we get to this point constantly where we have measures again and again where we're funding Muni, and then we look around and go, how do we get to a deficit again? Now, I know COVID had a very hard impact on our Muni, and I would not want to see it in any way diminished. I think that we should focus the funding on the drivers, on the maintenance, and of course on expanding and improving the lines. But then let's just chat a second about the other part, the Department of Parking and Traffic. They've kind of gone rogue. I think there's a very deep transit ideology within there that doesn't always reflect the reality of what it's like to live in San Francisco. Public transit, Great, let's keep that going. But the other side of the house needs to understand that cars are a reality. And a lot of what we get being out in our neighborhoods when SFMTA shows up, they have fully baked plans. They act as if they're listening to us, but many times they're not. They put in the HOV lanes, they close off streets, they redirect traffic, they take away parking spots. I don't think that is reflective of the reality of what it's like to be working in San Francisco and to be raising a family in San Francisco. You're not going to be able to go to the grocery store and put cat litter, carry cat litter home on the bus. There's sometimes where you do need to use your car. And I think that we need to have practical solutions, not ideological solutions for how we deal with transit in our city.
And I think those are all fair criticisms of the MTA, but for the purposes of these parcel taxes, I think we need to be incredibly clear about where this money is going. 100% of these taxes is going towards funding transit. 0% is going towards funding streetscape changes. You might think they're improvements, you might not think they're improvements, but for the purposes of these taxes, I think as a leader in this city, it is my duty to make it clear to people that you may hate what the MTA is doing on the streetscape, and I'm not going to argue with that one way or the other, not right now. But when it comes to these parcel taxes, for these sales taxes, 100% is going towards the bus. And we need to make that clear to people to build trust with them. We can argue over the streetscape stuff, we can argue over that all the time, but right now, we have a bus crisis, and we need to stand up and solve that bus crisis. And I want to thank many of you in the audience who've been at the forefront of doing that. I really am excited to continue working with you on it.
So staying on transportation, what are your priorities for improving transportation options in District 2? That could be public transit, bike infrastructure, pedestrian safety.
Well, my pie in the sky, I would love to see a subway. Absolutely. My second pie in the sky is that we extend the cable cars from Fisherman's Wharf down past Aquatic Park through Fort Mason. I think that would be awesome. Those are a little pie in the sky right now. But the thing is, and this is what I love about Danny Sauter. Danny Sauter knows we do not have the money for a subway right now. But Danny Sauter says, why not plan now for the future? And those things I think are incredibly, incredibly important. But I also think that when we talk about transportation changes or upgrades, again, the community parcel tax, like that is the biggest thing we can do to support transit in District 2, and that is right now. And going forward, as we look at the MTA's 2050 transportation plan, I think we should be setting speed targets on streets. We should be setting targets of max speeds, which we want relatively low, but we should be setting targets of average speeds, which we want relatively high. When it comes to street safety, I'm a huge fan of the speed cameras. I think they are fabulous. We can't rely on our 22 traffic enforcement officers in SFPD to keep us safe. We need things like red light cameras, like speed cameras. They help traffic flowing more smoothly. These things are good across the board. But again, having a thriving muni is good for everyone on every mode of transportation. It is the most important thing that we all can do. And all of us can do this by voting yes. We can all do this. It's the most important thing that we can do for getting around District 2 and the entire city.
So community aside, which is something we all can agree needs to happen and needs to flourish. There's the other realities of living in our district. It's just more than just transportation. When you're in the Cow Hollow side of it, when you're near Lombard, there is constant cars that will cut off Lombard and fly down the streets to try to make up for time. So when it comes to traffic mitigation, we do need some the stops that slow people down in certain areas, because you can't dare walk into the intersection without looking both ways. But then there's other things that work against it. I know there's recently the 20 feet on every corner that they've taken away the parking so that you can see. We'll see if that actually changes the safety for our intersections. In reality, the parking is important, and it does make it even harder to live in those communities. Another thing that they've done is they've done HOV lanes on Lombard, high occupancy vehicles. So that is supposed to be a vehicle that has 2 or more people in it and they can go along the far right lane. That's not even enforced. So if they're going to come forward and they're going to put things out for the public to change our driving patterns, they should have enforcement with it. That also goes for speed. We have people flying through our neighborhood. We've asked the police to please start, once the public knows that you're going to get a ticket for speeding, the word gets out and it happens less and less. The bull bus, that's another thing that was put into our community. That was so that the buses don't have to actually go into the space and they just pull straight into the lane. That causes a lot of traffic behind it. There's so many things you can do in the day-to-day living in a community. The scooters on the sidewalks, we should think, be a lot more careful about where we put those scooters. You can see tons of them strewn everywhere. We have to be thoughtful about the consequences of these new policies that get put upon communities without their input. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to be able to park where we need to park, we want to be able to drive where we need to drive, and we want the places to be safe.
Okay, what policies do you support to help attract families to San Francisco? And what steps do you think the city needs to take to retain families and make the city more friendly and accommodating to kids and their parents, families?
Yeah, families, it's incredibly difficult to start a family here in San Francisco. It's incredibly difficult to grow your family in San Francisco, especially when we look in District 2. You see a second kid getting born. You see people beginning to look across the bridge. You see people beginning to look down the peninsula. That's not what we want. We have the lowest number of children per capita in the United States. We're the 3rd oldest city in America and the fastest aging. We have a gap on one side, and we have to address all of these needs. And families, by the way, it means young families for sure, but it also means multi-generational families. It means how do we make it easier for seniors to stay here and live here in the same neighborhoods. So for me, family-friendly city. #1 city for families in 10 years. Can we do that? That's the goal. It's about safety, it's about a thriving job market, and it's about affordability, because at the end of the day, it is about costs. Housing costs, we've talked about. Transportation, we've just talked about. Childcare, we talked about a little earlier. But it is about schools. And today, I think schools are on our minds as much as anything because of this strike. I think at the state level, we need to be funding schools based on enrollment and not on attendance. I think San Francisco is uniquely badly affected by that. I think it's a major problem that we need to address. And I think that we need to support our teachers, not only in terms of the salaries that they're being offered or the healthcare, those are very important, don't get me wrong, they're extremely important. But we need to be investing in workforce housing, in missing middle housing. This is a conversation that we have with teachers, it's a conversation that I have with firefighters. 50% of firefighters don't live in the city. They were polled, of that 50%, 65, 2/3 of the firefighters don't live in the city, want to, but can't afford it. And so when we look at this, it is about housing. That is the #1 driver of the cost. And we do need to support our school system better. But again, one of the best ways to support our teachers is to make it easier for them to live here. This is a cycle. This is that crazy circle. And if we're not thoughtful about making progress on the things we failed to do over the last 30 years, we're just going to continue to fall farther and farther behind.
My family experienced this firsthand. You know, I have a 20-something-year-old daughters now, but we were at that point, as were all of our friends, where we were getting married. That was fine. We could still survive in San Francisco being married. But then we started having children. Well, that lasted for a while for many people when the children were young. But the looming kindergarten, and now, of course, preschool, was the moment where people took off. That's where they said we cannot afford to send our kids to private schools, even though we would love to go to the public schools. I have friends here, Lisa and Mike, they have been public school teachers, recently retired for 30 years. That we are the 2 families that didn't leave. We said, no, we're gonna stick it out. Now, we ended up sending our children to private schools, but it wasn't that we didn't want to send them to public schools. I think what needs to be revisited is allowing the public schools to serve the residents that are near those public schools. We applied to the public schools, but we got assigned a school that was halfway across town. something's wrong with the system when you can't send your kid to the school that they could walk to. I think if that were fixed and people could feel confident that they could walk their kids to school and their kids could walk home with their friends and go play with the kids nearby, a lot more families would want to stay here because they know that they could then be sending their kids to schools that were free. That would make a huge difference. Now, of course, housing is a factor. It will always be a factor. And when you start to have more kids and all of a sudden you realize that 2-bedroom apartment isn't cutting it, can you actually afford to move up to a bigger house? That might be a problem. But I can tell you, the housing that's going to be coming our way from the state laws is it's not going to be affordable. It's going to be the high-end market rate and luxury housing. It is not going to be what we want. And that is why I suggest that we take the public lands, and that is where we build 100% affordable housing for the next generation and for our teachers. But it does begin with the schools and being able to send your kids to those schools that are nearby.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. The lottery system is broken. It was intended to reduce segregation, and today there's more segregation in our schools than ever before. It's simply not working. We do have to give parents that certainty about where they can invest their time and their energy into their children's schools. And that certainty, you look across in the past few years, we've had controversies over, things like ethnic studies. We've had controversies over things like algebra. Algebra to me is, well, it's a math problem, and the answer should equal yes. But having that certainty for families, I think, starting with getting rid of that lottery, thank you for the courtesy giggle. But that lottery system, it increases the anxiety, it increases the uncertainty. As a guy who we just went through and we mapped out our choices and we ranked them 1, 2, 3, and I don't know. That uncertainty, couldn't agree with you more on that. That's where we got to give parents the ability to dive in and seize control for their children.
Okay.
We agree on that. Let's stay there.
All right. So when I listed off all those neighborhoods to start with, it highlighted the fact that it's a diverse district. How will you ensure that you are representing constituents from across your district?
Yeah, this has been a major focus of mine since the day I took office. It's about meeting with neighborhood associations, it's about meeting with merchants associations, but really it's about making sure getting out into the community, talking to residents. The reality is there are over 70,000 residents in the district. Many of them haven't lived here very long. They may not be members of neighborhood associations. So it's about doing the merchant walks, talking to the merchants. It's about listening to the emails, getting out there, knocking on doors, knocked over 3,000 doors, just in the district alone, and talking to people. It's about being there and talking and listening. It's about going to 300 Elm Street when they complain about, about issues in El Mali with illicit drug use. It is about getting out there and being on Pine Street and talking to a neighbor face to face about the individual who's stuck on that bench for 5 days. It's just about doing the work and getting out into the community. It's about meeting with larger buildings across the community. It takes work, it takes talking, it takes listening, and it takes working with all the different residents. This is a diverse district. 70% renter in the district. People think it's all homeowners. It's not. 70% renter. It's immigrants. It's people who barely lived here. It's our cousin who, just moved up from Santa Barbara and was waiting in line with 30 other people for a tiny 1.5 bedroom apartment. It is a surprisingly socioeconomically diverse district, and it just takes about getting out there and talking to people. There is no replacement for the hard work.
Well, this is my superpower. I am a community organizer. This is what I wake up thinking about and what I go to bed dreaming about. I've always reached out to the entire district, and in the case of Neighborhoods United SF and Rescue SF, to the entire city. Everything I seem to do often brings a whole broad spectrum of socioeconomic and ideological differences. And what I always have been successful at is finding the common between all these folks and getting on the same page. I, at the end of the day, believe that we all have far more in common than not. And we need to find those places of commonality to build those relationships. With the Neighborhoods United SF, where we had this very broad spectrum of people who had concerns about the upzoning plan, individuals that probably hadn't worked together before. over 2 years of working together, all of a sudden you start to realize the different perspectives people carry that you didn't know about and that now you own and carry for them. So for me to understand what are the different needs across the district is what I do every day and what I think about. I already know a lot of different leaders throughout the district because I've worked with all the different neighborhood associations and the merchant corridors. But my work through Neighborhoods United SF has expanded that even further to tenants advocacy groups, to small business advocacy groups, to affordable housing developers, and to the labor unions. So I've worked with, you name it, and I think that I always will be an open door and an open ear to the varied interests of the residents and businesses within District 2.
So the city had a moment when it looked like federal agents were going to flood into its streets. How would you respond if President Trump deployed federal agents such as those from Immigration Customs Enforcement in District 2?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is not how we respond when it happens, but what we start doing right now. Before. We need to expect that it may very well happen in the future. When people ask me what I can do to fight back against Donald Trump, the number one thing that I think I can do as a supervisor is to make sure San Francisco is governed well. I believe that Donald Trump was elected president because we didn't address the fentanyl crisis here in San Francisco. I think we need to do a much better job of proving that a city with our fabulous liberal values, where we say, be who you want to be, love who you want to love, your body, your choice. When we can stand on those strong values and functionally govern our city, that is when this country is most successful. And when it comes to preparing for this, I think it's about making sure that we have immigrant legal defense funding available, which we have already done. It's about making sure that every business in the district has information about what to do if ICE comes into the city. And it's about making sure that every San Franciscan knows, regardless of your political stripes, having the National Guard in San Francisco is not safe. It's not safe. It won't increase safety. It will harm our immigrant communities, absolutely. It will cause businesses to close for weeks, if not months on end, and it will make us less safe. When it comes to the challenges we have here in San Francisco, we have to be honest about them. We have to address them head on. But having ICE here is the absolute worst of all of those. And so it means openly communicating, providing those legal resources, making sure that we stand up for our sanctuary city policy, which is incredibly important. Sanctuary city policy is the core of the safe city. Making sure that our immigrants know that they are safe when they are with the police officers. It's about making sure that the police have supplemental training about what to do and how to protect our immigrant communities, which we've been doing is incredibly important. It's about all of these things. But preparation is the most important thing. If we're not prepared ahead of time when it happens, we will fall behind. And that's what all the work until now has been and will continue to be.
So I support our sanctuary city laws, and particularly with the climate that's going on in our country, where it's very clear that we do not want ICE agents coming in and terrorizing our immigrant community. Even the strike that's recently happening, and of course it's not good that kids are not able to go to school, but it's important, of course, that teachers get the salary and the benefits they need. But the kids that can't go to school, what you're hearing is that parents are actually nervous about bringing them to a library, a place that they don't know that that kid has sufficient protection. To live in that terror, I think until we've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, we have no idea what it feels like to be an immigrant in the city. The sanctuary laws give the protections to those immigrants so that they can go to work and feel that their kids will be safe, and their kids can go to school and feel that their parents will be safe. And I will always stand behind that, and I will always stand behind our mayor and his efforts to prevent ICE from coming in and terrorizing our immigrant community. So I will always be there for the immigrant community and for the sanctuary city laws that are necessary to make our residents feel safe and be safe.
So the a lot of the debate around housing policy has centered on numbers that assume a level of growth in the city. And the question was put to me, to put to you. Do you think San Francisco has too many people, not enough people, just the right amount? What kind of growth should we aspire to?
I think San Francisco does not have enough people. When we look at the numbers, the RENA numbers, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment that came down to 82,000 some odd units. That number to me, legally, it's important. We have an obligation to meet the state law, but is that the right number? Is that not the right number? That's a little less important to me. What's important to me is that San Francisco is not affordable. We need to create more opportunity. We need to build more housing. Full stop. When I talked to the small businesses in our district, last summer we canvassed 434 businesses as part, ground floor businesses only, as part of small business summer. Two main complaints: not enough foot traffic, too hard to hire people. And when we said, why is it too hard to hire people? And they said, it's really hard to find people who live close enough to get to work. When we don't have enough people shopping here, and it's too hard to find people to work here, I think we have a population problem. Now, the reality is we're not going to solve that overnight. But I don't believe that we should be relying on a bureaucrat in San Francisco, in Sacramento, excuse me, to project out what the population could be based on current trends. I think it's our obligation to carve the future that we want. A future that has more than 48,000 students in our school system. A future where artists can graduate from art school, which hopefully we will still have art schools here, when artists can live and work here. You know, I asked an audience the other night at a museum, I said, who's the greatest, living, working San Francisco artist? And they said, what did you fella? Well, he lives in Oakland. When's the last great San Francisco band? I think it is our obligation to build the future that we want, build the opportunity that we want. And right now at this population level, we do not have that. We need a bigger city.
Well, to do so, to build a bigger city, we might have to make more landfill. I think that that's a good question. And that's a question someone asked me, like, what is the goal? Should San Francisco be 1.5 million people? We're about 830,000 right now. Well, that's a question we should put to our populace. Is that what you want? Is that where we should go? And if so, then we should be making policies and rules around that. But think about this. The mandate that came down from the state to build 82,000 units, they estimate 2.5 persons per unit. So we're up around 200,000 more people in San Francisco, should that be fulfilled. So now we're over 1 million people in San Francisco. Where is the infrastructure to support that type of growth? There is no funding that goes along with this mandate for the schools, for the sewers, for the water system. We have out in the Sunset a failing water system. Should there be a fire out there, that would be devastating. When you ask the planning department, well, if we're going to grow the population, fine, but how are we going to grow it responsibly with the proper infrastructure to support it? And their answer is, we'll worry about that as we move along. Well, we know it'll never get done, and then infrastructure will fail. If you ask people in general what's their biggest concern about a growth in San Francisco, is that there won't be supportive infrastructure. If our muni is already crumbling and we're going to throw 200,000 more people into the city, do we have the funding for muni to meet that demand? So I think we have to think carefully about San Francisco. We have water on 3 sides. So the only way you grow is up. Fine. If that's what the citizens of San Francisco want, then that's what we'll do. But we have to be thoughtful about the impacts of that. And will we be happy in the end when we look like Vancouver and we have a bunch of tall buildings that are owned by the wealthiest or by offshore interests? And those families that we really want to be living in there, or the workforce that we really want to be living in there, cannot afford those buildings. And our city is forever more changed.
The biggest reason that our schools don't have enough money is they don't have enough kids. Funding is based on enrollment, and enrollment has been declining for now decades. One of the best ways to generate more money is to generate more property taxes. The best way to generate more property taxes is to build more housing. we can fund the infrastructure that we need while building the housing. This is the #1 way to get money in the city coffers. We are investing in the western side of the city in the water infrastructure with this upcoming infrastructure bond. That is incredibly important. And I won't pretend like that's enough. We need to keep doing that. But right now, when we look at this city, the #1 way to generate more money, or let's say generate more money for Muni, will it be more riders? More riders is good. Muni is suffering from a lack of ridership. That is one of the reasons we have a funding crisis. Building more housing, increasing the population will generate more funding that will fund the desperate infrastructure that we need. And the school system is a perfect example of that.
Sorry, one more question.
What's that? No, we're done after this.
Okay.
So you get the last rebuttal if you want it. Okay. Well, in that case, we are at the time for closing statements.
Wow.
It's,
I have more cards here. I
I
have more things to
Talk
talk about.
fast.
No.
Talk fast. Why don't you go ahead. Start with your 2 minutes.
I'll go. So I'm grateful for all of you coming here tonight. I know we got a lot of things to do, but being here together is important. And we are together. We are a city. We are united. And politics apart, we are most effective when we do come together. So as your supervisor, I will fight for targeted, affordable housing that creates the homes we need, but does not destroy the neighborhoods that we love. I will stand up to Sacramento when the state laws go too far. I will champion our small businesses because they provide the essentials that we need, and of course, the fun corridors that we love. And I will be relentless about public safety, making sure that you not only are safe, but that you feel safe. I work for you, not for political insiders and not for special interests. And I look forward to collaborating with our mayor and with our fellow colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. My role as a supervisor will be to represent the residents, the businesses, and to bring the department heads in, and then bringing people that even disagree, and solve problems and deliver results, as I have proven that I can do with the Cow Hollow Association, with Rescue SF, and with Neighborhoods United SF. This is not a stepping stone for me. This is not climbing a political ladder. I am independent, I'm experienced, and I have deep roots in this community, and I will work hard for you. I am Lori Brooke, and I am ready to be your next District 2 Supervisor.
Well, Patrick, thank you for moderating tonight, and to Wallenberg, UDC, Edley Dems, D2 Dems, Alice, the DCCC, thank you all for making the effort to host us here tonight. I think I counted those 6 right tonight, so sorry. But it really is a joy to be able to be with all of you, to share these ideas. And it's been an absolute privilege to serve as your supervisor over the past year. Being able to be at the Avila Street Neighborhood Association and seeing the work that you do, being able to work with Cathedral Hill neighbors is why we do this, because at the end of the day, I love raising my family in San Francisco. I love this city. I could not be happier here. And when I think about the future, when I think about building the future, when I think about creating more opportunity for all of us, and yes, for the people who aren't here yet, I think about my family. I think about your family. But I also think about the fact that for the last 30 years, we failed to create enough opportunity. We failed to be thoughtful. And over the last year, you've seen what happens when you get that alignment from a majority on the Board of Supervisors who wants to see progress, from a mayor who is working in alignment and collaborating with us. You see what can happen, but we are not done yet. We are not done yet. I am excited to keep us moving forward, to keep that accelerator down, to keep our streets safer, and to build this city up for our families. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. To those of you who are in the service of us each and every day, thank you as well, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you to the candidates and everybody for coming out, and that's a wrap.